Rome's last legion did not die quietly. Picture the scene: shields clashing, iron tearing flesh, men shouting names of emperors already dust. Smoke crawls low over the field, thick with the stench of wet wool and blood. A soldier stumbles through mud, shield cracked, oath burning hotter than the fires consuming the horizon. But Rome itself is gone. No Senate, no emperor. Only the eagle standard remains, torn and blackened, fluttering like a lie no one dares admit. This was Rome's last legion, a fragment of an empire that refused to die, still marching under banners the rest of the world had forgotten. Textbooks will tell you Rome fell in 476 AD, when a barbarian warlord deposed the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus. A clean ending, curtains closed, but the soldiers of Rome did not vanish overnight. They marched on, into exile, into mercenary service, into battles no chronicler bothered to record. And this is their story, not emperors or marble halls, but men in the mud, hungry and bleeding, saluting ghosts. Today we follow their march, from Gaul's fields to Constantinople's walls, and uncover what happened to the last Roman legion and why their story forces us to ask if Rome ever truly fell. Picture a soldier standing on the walls of Rome in 410 AD. He grips his spear until his knuckles split, not from battle but from waiting. The streets below are jammed with refugees clutching whatever they can carry. Smoke rises beyond the gates. The Visigoths are here, Rome's most persistent nightmare. And when the walls finally break, it is not the glory of Caesar's legions but chaos. Boots slamming on cobblestones, screams drowned by fire, the reek of grain stores igniting. Alaric's men pour through the gates with crude axes, and the defenders barely fight. Some throw down their arms, some pray, some loot alongside the invaders. The eternal city, untouched for 8 centuries, is sacked in 3 days. To those who survive, it feels like the end of the world. But the world does not end. Not yet. Rome doesn't collapse in a single night. It erodes. For decades after, battles rage, banners rise, but the legions are no longer Roman in blood. Goths, Franks, and Huns, once mortal enemies, now fill the ranks as foederati, barbarian allies sworn to protect the empire for pay they rarely receive. Latin orders echo from foreign tongues. Helmets once polished with gold flake green with rust. By 451 AD, the empire staggers to one last triumph. On the fields of the Catalonian plains, in what is now France, the Roman general Flavius Aetius rallies a coalition against Attila the Hun. It is a patchwork force, Visigoths on horseback, Franks with axes, Romans clinging to discipline they barely remember. Against all odds, they stop Attila's advance. Chroniclers hail Aetius as the last of the Romans. But to the men in the mud, it feels less like glory than reprieve. One more gasp of breath before drowning. And yet, even this victory hides a stranger truth. Because while this battle would be remembered, the soldiers' journey wouldn't end here. Their march, fractured and forgotten, would carry them into wars and places Rome itself barely knew. Then comes 476 AD. No dramatic stand, no hero's charge. The boy emperor Romulus Augustulus quietly abdicates when the Germanic warlord Odoacer seizes power. Historians mark this moment as Rome's fall, the end of the Western Empire. Clean date, clean ending. Only it wasn't clean. The soldiers didn't vanish. Men still marched in armor bearing the eagle. They still swore oaths to an empire that no longer existed. Some retreated to scattered enclaves in Gaul and Hispania. Others drifted east toward Constantinople, where emperors still called themselves Romans. No one wrote their names. No one paid them. They became ghosts in their own lifetime. And here's where the history books fall silent. But the whispers begin. Fragments of these soldiers reappear in unlikely places. Mercenary bands in barbarian courts, border garrisons clinging to order in Britain, even distant rumors of fish-scale formations in Chinese chronicles. Could survivors of Rome's last legions really have marched that far? Before we follow those whispers, There is one last stand to witness, a final enclave of Roman power clinging to life in Gaul. There, on muddy fields near a town called Soissons, the legions would fight one last battle under the banner of Rome. It was not the end of the story, only the beginning of its strangest chapter. The Roman West was gone. Italy had fallen to Odoacer. Spain and Africa belonged to Visigoths and Vandals. But in northern Gaul, what is now northern France, one fragment of Rome refused to die. It was called the domain of Soissons, and at its head stood a man named Syagrius. Syagrius was no emperor, though to his men he might as well have been. He was the son of Aegidius, a Roman general who had ruled Gaul in the empire's last years. When the West collapsed in 476, Syagrius held on, maintaining Roman law, Roman drill, even Roman taxes in a world that had stopped caring. To barbarian neighbors, he was a joke. Gregory of Tours, the Frankish historian, sneered at him as King of the Romans, a title meant to sting. To the legionaries who followed him, he was the last link to a vanished world. By 486, this fragile enclave stood alone. South of it were the Visigoths, west lay the Bretons, and to the northeast rose the Franks, a confederation of Germanic tribes led by a ruthless young warlord named Clovis. Clovis was barely 20, ambitious, and eager to carve a kingdom out of the ruins of Rome. To him, Soissons was more than a prize. It was proof. Destroy Syagrius, and the age of Rome would truly be over. The armies met near Soissons, a small Gallo-Roman town on the River Aise. The battlefield was a patchwork of muddy fields and low hills, nothing like the marble forums where Roman triumphs were once celebrated. Syagrius's men, though outnumbered, formed ranks in the old style. Rectangular shields locked tight, pillar raised, they assembled into disciplined lines as if Caesar himself were watching. Their armor was dented, their pay long overdue, but their training held. Across the field, Clovis's Franks gathered in looser formations. Long-haired warriors armed with heavy axes, they shouted war cries in guttural tongues, mocking the Roman order they were about to smash. To them, this wasn't a battle between civilizations. It was an opportunity, plunder, glory, the chance to prove barbarian ferocity against the husk of an empire. The charge began at dawn. Roman horns sounded, low and mournful, answered by Frankish war cries that tore across the mist. Shields slammed together. The first clash was a wall of wood and iron, the Franks hacking downward with their infamous Francisca throwing axes, the Romans stabbing upward with short swords dulled by years of neglect. At first, discipline held. The Roman testudo, the tortoise formation, absorbed the shock, a wall of shields bristling with spears. Frankish warriors fell in heaps, hacked apart by practiced thrusts, honed in centuries of drill. But numbers told their story. Clovis commanded thousands. Syagrius had perhaps a few thousand at most, many of them local militias or old veterans who had not seen pay in years. When the flanks buckled, the testudo collapsed into chaos. Picture it. A legionary splattered with mud, shield splintered, staring up at a Frankish axe mid-swing. The oath to Rome still burns in his chest, but the empire he swore to is long dead. His death will not be recorded in any annal. No emperor will mourn him. He dies as Rome itself died, quietly, in the mud, remembered only by those who stood beside him. Syagrius fled the field when defeat became certain. He sought refuge with the Visigoths to the south, but politics in the 5th century were as brutal as any battlefield. The Visigothic king handed him straight over to Clovis. Gregory of Tours tells us Syagrius was executed, though he spares us the details. A clean line in the record. But for the men who followed him, it was not clean. It was the final shattering of a world. With Soissons fallen, the last Roman enclave in the west ceased to exist. There were no more emperors, no more governors, no more legions flying the old eagle standard. To historians, this is the footnote that marks Rome's true death in the west. But whispers in the east tell a stranger story, that fragments of these soldiers fled beyond the ruins, carrying their discipline, their oaths, and their banners into lands Rome itself had barely known. And if you think that sounds like romantic fantasy, wait until you see the footprints they left behind, in Britain, in Persia, even in the chronicles of far-off China. Rome's march was not over. Not yet. Soissons should have been the end. No more eagles, no more legions, no more Rome in the West. But history rarely gives clean endings. After the slaughter, some men simply walked away. Desertion or survival, it hardly mattered. Their empire was dead. Their oath wasn't. The records go quiet. One moment, a legionary fights in Gaul. The next, silence. Yet traces of them surface in odd places, like footprints left in wet earth. A century later, Byzantine rosters mention recruits from the far west, drilled but foreign, carrying names that feel Roman yet strange. Were these refugees from Soissons, mercenaries, or coincidence? Historians argue. The timing tempts suspicion. Legends swirl further afield. Chinese chronicles speak of fish-scale formations, shield walls foreign to their own tactics, used by strange captives resettled in a frontier town called Legionaries. Most scholars dismiss the link to legion, yet the theory refuses to die. Imagine Roman soldiers stranded thousands of miles from home, defending a border Rome never even knew existed. It sounds impossible, but stranger truths hide in history's cracks. Britain offers another echo. After Rome abandoned the island, garrisons stayed behind, patching walls with timber and clinging to old drill. Out of this chaos rises the legend of Arthur, likely no shining knight, but perhaps a Romano-British war leader wielding cavalry tactics born from late Roman warfare. To Saxon invaders, these men would have seemed like ghosts, Romans who hadn't realized the empire was gone. These fragments, mercenaries, myths, half-truths suggest Rome didn't vanish. It dissolved, its discipline bleeding into the armies that followed. The West may have forgotten them, but the East never stopped calling itself Rome. Which is why our next march leads to Constantinople, where the last to bear the Roman name faced the cannons of 1453. The West called itself dead, but the East never accepted the funeral. In Constantinople, the new Rome, founded by Constantine in 330 AD, emperors still claimed the title Basileus ton Romaion, Emperor of the Romans. 1,000 years after the fall of Romulus Augustulus, they still minted coins stamped Roma. Their capital still rose behind the Theodosian walls, 30 feet high and layered 3 deep. Walls so strong they had shrugged off Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even Crusaders. But by the spring of 1453, this Roman Empire had shrunk to almost nothing, a few scraps of Greece, the walls of Constantinople, and the name itself. On the throne sat Constantine XI Palaiologos, last of his line, ruling a city more memory than empire. Picture him. An emperor with titles stretching back to Caesar, commanding barely 7,000 defenders. Facing him, the Ottomans under Mehmed II, 19 years old, ambitious, ruthless, bringing 80,000 men and the largest cannons the medieval world had ever seen. One bombard, cast by a Hungarian engineer, hurled stone balls so massive they shook the ground for miles. To the defenders on the walls, the roar must have sounded like the world ending. For weeks, the siege dragged on. The cannon fire never stopped, day and night, iron pounding stone, smoke choking the battlements. Soldiers patched breaches by hand, dragging rubble into place while arrows hissed overhead. Latin prayers mixed with Greek curses. Some men still saluted the eagle standard, others crossed themselves before icons. Food ran short, water fouled, morale frayed, and yet they held. Eyewitnesses describe Constantinople's final night as half vigil, half wake. Priests carried relics through the streets. Soldiers knelt in Hagia Sophia, the great domed cathedral, receiving communion side by side with civilians. Then they returned to the walls, some singing hymns, others sharpening blades for what they knew was the end. Constantine XI addressed them simply. The city is entrusted to you. Defend her. No promise of victory, only duty, a Roman emperor to the last. Dawn came on May 29. The final assault began. Ottoman drums thundered. Janissaries surged forward in waves, climbing ladders, filling moats with their own dead. The defenders met them with everything left: arrows, stones, boiling oil. The first wave broke, then the second. For a moment, hope flickered. Then a breach opened at the gate of St. Romanus. There, amid smoke and splintered shields, Constantine fought his last battle. Accounts differ. Some say he tore off his imperial robes, fighting as a common soldier. Others claim he cried, "The city is lost, but I live," and charged into the crush. What is certain is that he vanished in the melee. No body was ever found. The last Roman emperor died nameless in the mud, like the legionaries at Soissons. By midday, the Ottomans were inside the city. Hagia Sophia was stormed. Survivors were enslaved. The double-headed eagle, heir to the old Roman standard, was torn down. Mehmed rode through the gates, proclaiming Constantinople the new capital of his empire. The Romans, as the East had called itself for 1,000 years, were gone. Or were they? Even as Western Europe celebrated Byzantium's fall, the people inside those walls had never called themselves Byzantine. They were Romaioi, Romans. In their eyes, the empire that began with Augustus had lasted not 500 years, but nearly 1,500. It ended not in Italy, but on the walls of a Greek city battered by Turkish cannon fire. And yet Rome's march did not stop here either. Roman law survived in Europe's courts. Roman roads still shaped trade routes. Roman military drill lived on in the armies that conquered the New World. Even the eagle standard, born in Caesar's legions, perches today on modern flags from Russia to the United States. So when did Rome fall? In 476, with a boy emperor deposed. In 486, with the last legion cut down at Soissons. In 1453, with Constantine's final charge. Or did Rome never fall at all, surviving in every empire that dares call itself eternal? The last legion did not die in a single battle. It dissolved into the bloodstream of history, carried in fragments across continents and centuries. And perhaps, in ways we barely notice, we still march beneath its shadow. Rome is supposed to have an ending. Historians like clean dates. 476 AD, when Romulus Augustulus vanished into obscurity. 486, when Syagrius's legion fell at Soissons. 1453, when Constantine XI died on the walls of Constantinople. Pick your tombstone and carve the words, "Here lies Rome." But the soldiers never got the memo. They kept marching long after the historians closed the book. They fought for pay under barbarian kings. They drilled in forgotten garrisons on distant frontiers. They raised their children on tales of Caesars no one else remembered. Rome, for them, was not a map. It was an oath they could not set down. Even after the standards burned, the empire's bones endured. Roman roads became Europe's trade routes. Roman law shaped kingdoms and constitutions. Roman tactics echoed in medieval armies and, centuries later, in modern drill. The eagle, symbol of Rome's legions, still perches on flags in government buildings across the world. So did Rome ever truly fall? Or did it simply seep into everything around it, so thoroughly that we no longer see it? The last legion may have died nameless, in mud and fire, but their march continues, in every empire that calls itself eternal, in every army that salutes a banner and swears an oath. Perhaps that is Rome's truest legacy. Not marble, not emperors, not even conquest, but the stubborn persistence of an idea, that somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the legions are still marching. Thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and click the video on the screen to see the horrifying way Rome dealt with cowards in battle.